So I have, a recovery group that I go to locally, and we've helped revive that meeting, and now it's started again.
Yeah.
About
A lot
6
of
months
my
ago.
guys in the houses go to that meeting now, and they're
It's-
like, dude, I
it's great.
went to a meeting Friday night, it's a Pacific group? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great meeting, dude.
it's fantastic. I with my schedule with family obligations and whatnot, I go about 1 to 2 times a month, and it's been great. Sometimes there's 60 people in there,
Yeah.
which I remember when I first came around. That was the first recovery meeting I went to.
Yeah.
This time.
Well, that was the meeting, dude. Like, that was the
There's like
meeting once
200
a
people
week.
there.
Like, it was a social thing,
Yeah.
but it was like young people in New Haven, and I'm 43, and there's a bunch of 20-year-olds running around with recovery,
Yeah.
killing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I remember they had the Boxcar Joe was there, and the cake lady. Remember they used to have, even if you were a guy, it was known as the cake lady.
Yeah,
They'd make
still
the
is.
cake every week.
Still is.
They used to give free big
Still
books
do.
away, and it's an offer you couldn't refuse. If you
Uh,
didn't have
a very
money,
liberal donation.
Yeah.
I think is the way they
Yeah,
phrase it.
and
Not
now-
liberal. Free.
free. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's great. Pat Quinn,
Yep.
hats off to that dude, man. He just he's always
He's the
always in the trenches with the newcomers. So.
Yeah, still to this day.
Yep.
Cake Lady Pat. He's known as Cake Lady Pat. You might see him this Friday. And
Yeah.
he's still known as Cake
Shit,
Lady
I gotta
Pat.
go to that meeting. I'm gonna go again.
I was just there on Friday.
Were you?
Yeah. Then we had what seemed to be a lot of new folks from sober livings around the area, which is fantastic. And then some people that have been around a little bit, and
Yeah.
then people that were there, like my. The time I came to New Haven the first time was like '07, and I remember walking up to that meeting, and Chaz is standing outside,
Chaz.
and Troy,
Troy. Yep.
who I had never known in my
Josh.
life before at the time, but I didn't know what a door greeter is. Come to find out they're door greeters, and they're
Yeah.
standing there,
Yeah.
and they had their hands out, and they had a smile on their face. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what the?
Yeah.
Can I swear on this? Or-
Yeah.
in my head, I'm like, what the fuck do these guys
Yeah.
want?
Yeah.
Because no one was happy to see me at that point in my life. But they welcomed me and said, we're glad you're
they
here.
were happy
And
to
that was a
see you then,
huge
yeah.
seed planted in my head that when I was finally ready, New Haven was a good, safe place where people were friendly, and they were young,
Yep.
so,
Yep.
um,
Young, killing it, and it's
yeah.
like fuck.
yeah,
I was the old guy when I came in there. I was 43 years old.
I'm the old guy now.
All right.
At the meeting, I'm 45, yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Well, shit. If I show, I'm 60, bro. So
Pat's old too.
yeah.
Hopefully
Pat-
Pat hears this, you're old, Pat.
Yeah. We did an episode with Pat.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then we just had our 10th year anniversary
I know, I'm sorry I missed
for New
it.
Beginning.
He did all the cooking.
He did the cooking. Dude.
Yeah.
Knocked it out of the park.
I was just talking to him yesterday.
And dude, he did it for fucking $200, dude. Everything.
He's
Like
the
that's the kind of dude. He didn't want to make any money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just came in and was of service and made some fucking killer barbecue and
Yeah. Oh, the best, dude. And the sauces he makes?
yeah, his barbecue sauces.
Just yesterday, I'm texting with him at like 10 o'clock last night, and I have a really close personal friend of mine that's in a sober living in Hamden, and he lived with me when he was 13 because his dad kicked him out, and he helped him get into treatment recently, and I never really felt the love of recovery, and I think he's getting that now, and there's some other guys in the house, and Pat brought over, like, out of his own pocket, I think, a ton of barbecue to the house and just hung out with the guys last night, and that was something that was playing. Like, that's the type of individuals you can meet if you join this
Yeah.
society of sorts,
Yeah.
If you kind of jump in with both feet and allow yourself, to get into recovery, is that love that we've all been seeking through substances or women or money or whatever is found here, true kinship and friendship and love, that I personally was never able to find in a bottle or a needle or, through the streets, that I was so desperately trying to find because
Yeah.
I wasn't getting it at home when I was a kid either,
Yeah.
Beautiful thing.
Well, it stops working. Like the drink and the drug stops working after a while.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It doesn't really take away that pain. You know, and then it always sucks because the pain goes away for a little bit, but then you wake up the next day and you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
My life sucks even more now.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that thinks they were an addict or an alcoholic prior to ever picking up a drink or a drug. You know, I had those behaviors way early in my life. Grew up in a very alcoholic household. My mom was one of us, you know, hopeless variety. And my dad, with my adult brain, looks at it now as my dad, you know, was doing the best he could because it was pretty much a one-income household. So he decided to go to work all the time. You know, my dad was a machinist and worked second and third shift my entire life. So, you know, I come off the bus and my dad would be going to work. So that meant, you know, all hell would break loose in the household. You know, and I, as a young kid, had to be the parent, the mature one, you know, showing up for my younger sister and trying to figure out in my adolescent brain what was going on, you know, and so I found laughter to be the first thing I went towards, making people laugh as a young kid, you know, and as you know, in first grade I get in trouble for standing on the desk and mooning the class, you know, and then I end up getting kept back. And other things too, to like make myself feel better about myself, you know. When I was young, I went up in the woods behind my house and took a piece of glass and cut myself all over my body just to feel different, you know. And you know, and then it was sports, you know, and I excelled at sports. I was a really good baseball player and I was a decent basketball player and you know, I found that, you know, I can get love from that, you know, applause from that. It would feed the ego too, you know. And, you know, I had this one constant, amazing individual in my life as a kid, and that was my grandfather. And I would retreat to his house every weekend in Waterbury, and that's where I would spend my time. And, you know, my grandfather taught me about golf and spoiled me, and bring me out to eat and everything else. But he was a place of peace. You know, my grandparents' house was a place of peace where I wasn't finding that at home. So I retreated there as much as I possibly could. And, you know, in 8th grade, we were playing a basketball game. It was, you know, the parents make you feel like it's the NBA finals. And we were playing against this, our rival, let's say. And we won in double overtime, and I had 31 points, and it was like this big to-do. And my grandfather came to everything. You know, all my practices, my basketball, baseball games. And I remember him calling me over, and then the coach called us over, so I told him, hold on. And I went over into the huddle, and next thing you know, the gym's going crazy. My grandfather has a heart attack and dies on the floor in front of me, you know. And
why you went to the huddle?
Yeah.
Your grandfather called you over, you said, hold on, went to the huddle, and then you came back and he had a heart attack.
He died right there on the floor.
Wow.
Yeah. So that day for me was like when the light switch just completely shut off.
Were you like traumatized by that? Because
yeah.
Did you wonder what he wanted to say to you, or?
I kind of know he wanted to congratulate me, you know, but it was, you know, you go from like the happiest moment in your life, having the high score of the game and beating your rival and being on fire and like. Wow. At basketball court, at baseball field was where I actually felt in control of my life. You know, I was a pitcher, so I could control the game, and you know, for baseball. So like,
let me ask you, Al. Do you ever think about what he would have said to you, like what he wanted to say to you? Like, do you ever? Does that go through your mind?
Yeah, I mean,
he was very supportive. He was very nurturing, loving guy.
Most likely, he wanted to say he loved me and what a great job I did.
Great job, man.
That was it, you know.
Yeah.
I've never really thought more about that because I just kind of knew who he was and how supportive he was.
What do you think he would have, if right now at this moment he said, "Hey, Allan, I want to come here. I want to tell you something." What do you think he would say to you right now?
I think he'd say the same thing.
What
with where life is.
Yeah.
You know,
how proud he is of
you. You know, if he was able to see everything that led up to this, you know, he'd probably have some things to say about my past, but at the end of the day, you know, he would be compassionate, you know, with knowing what I went through as a kid, and then
Wow.
on the streets, and then to where my life is today.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Middlebury, outside Waterbury.
That's a tough town, man.
No. So the funny thing is, and this is why another part of why I always felt different. Like, I didn't grow up in the side of town that had money. You know, we grew up on like the Waterbury side, and
Yeah.
you know, I had one bathroom in my house, and my dad was like the sole income person as a machinist for Pratt & Whitney, and you know, my mother, you know, had jobs over the years, but you know, we're lower middle class, I'd say, you know, and grew up in just a regular neighborhood, you know, but I constantly always compared myself to everyone else, you know, because I grew up with kids that were, you know, and they'd have a brand new car in the parking lot and stuff like that. My first car was like $100 Subaru, you know, that I used to have to pop start because the engine light would go on every so often, and I'd be on the highway, you know, jumping in, I'd be jumping in at 55 miles an hour just to, you know, go a distance. But, you know, which later on in my life actually kind of came full circle with that, you know, comparing myself financially to others and stuff like that. But if I could back up, just so that day, you know, I had drank going into 8th grade right before that all happened for the first time. And the first time I drank was at this party my friend James's older sister threw, and she got us booze, and I remember from the moment that bottle hit my lips, it was just to go straight to oblivion. You know, that was the whole point of it all. It was to like just completely let go of everything and feel different and disengage and all that. And that night I lost half my clothes and passed out in a closet, and woke up the next day saying that was the greatest night of my life. I can't wait to do that forever, you know. So at that age, it's really hard to continuously get booze or drugs, you know, in that town and stuff. So when this stuff happened with my grandfather, you know, a few months later, I ended 8th grade, and then that's where it all kind of, the progression took off, you know. And before I knew it, in my freshman year of high school, you know, I'm smoking weed and doing hallucinogens and booze and stuff like that. And I'm on the varsity baseball team as a freshman, as a starting pitcher, and I'm failing gym class, you know. So life became really unmanageable really quickly, and I ended up failing freshman year, and just completely checked out. You know, within 2 months of being in my freshman year, I was in trouble for stealing a car and being drunk at the homecoming dance, and got suspended for 10 days. And I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, if I get in trouble at school, they'll suspend me and I don't have to go to school. So I did that a lot, you know, and you know, struggled in that way. My friends and I got really into like, we were really into the Grateful Dead and Fish scene, still am. And with that came travel and a nomad kind of lifestyle, and every kind of drug you can imagine in its purest forms. And we went right after that. And, you know, by the time I'm 18, I've traveled the country. I've seen like 40 something states, and I've partied in every single one of them, and to major excess, you know. And so high school took 5 years to graduate. I was almost 20. It looked like it was 20 when I was buying booze and stuff like that, but my primary focus was just to get messed up, and that was it. You know, I had no dreams, aspirations, goals whatsoever, other than to sell drugs or use drugs, and, you know, just kind of live in this little shadow of existence, I guess. And you know, that was probably the scariest thing, kind of going back to the purpose thing, partially, like, what was I here to do? You know, why am I here? Why am I on earth? You know, you saw these people that had dreams of being an architect or a lawyer or electrician already in high school. And I was like, how do you know that? You know, and I was just like, I just want to use drugs, you know, and get high. That's what I'm really good at. You know, I'm a professional at that. So, by the time I'm 20, 21, I'm addicted to opiates and cocaine, and, you know, and life's just, you know, trending downward. and getting bad. And, the rest started happening and stuff like that. And, 2005, my dad and my sister finally had enough of me and my mom, and they left. So that left my mom to drink herself to death and use the benzos, and me to do heroin. And I come home from work. I'm able to somehow hold a job because I'm mainly just doing heroin. I haven't really mainly gotten to crack cocaine at that point. So you can kind of hold a job. I'm like stealing everything on Monday. I'm pawning it on, Monday, Tuesday. I'm getting my check in Friday, getting it all out. And then by Monday, it's all back in the pawn shop type of deal. And I come home from work. I got a gram of heroin in my pocket. My mom's dwindled down to about 100 pounds at this point, and she's psychotic and out of her mind. And you got to realize, like, over the years, I would find my mom on the kitchen floor having seizures, urinating herself, talking about killing herself, multiple times, I think, of attempts to like cut herself and stuff like that. So I've been through the gamut with this, and what I understood of addiction at the time was, you're my mom, you should be able to stop, all the while I got a gram of heroin in my pocket that I'm about to go use. So we got into it on September 20th, 2005, and I said some really hurtful things, like, I hate you and I wish you'd die. And I had to put my hands on her and push her up against the wall. And then I went upstairs and I got high, and I overdosed. And came to, like 2 hours later, came downstairs, I found her on the kitchen floor, which again wasn't like a rare occurrence, but this time she wasn't breathing. And, I went over to her and tried to do CPR to the best of my ability in the condition I was in, and I remember, it's burned in my memory, breathing into her, seeing her chest rise, and then hearing the sound of air coming out through the lips, And, I called 911, but, when I'm in my addiction, it's so strong that I left her there and I went and did more drugs, And she died that day. And, for the next 2 years, I was in a very bad downward spiral because I was left in this house that I grew up in that had some great memories and stuff, but a lot of bad memories. And I was left there with my dog. Thank God for that dog, or, I would have killed myself multiple times. I tried to every day, essentially, with what I was putting in my body, but I'd hit like a really low emotional bottom, and eventually one day making it into an ambulance because I got a butterfly knife in my hand and I don't know what's up or down, and I was honest with my dad about it when I called him, and then shortly after an ambulance comes, so I ended up in Bridgeport Mental Health for a while. And then, it was just like the regular gamut. I would, bounce in and out of programs. It took me 9 times to finish the 5-day detox because my brain will tell me something that's not true a lot, still does, and it would tell me that I was okay and I could figure this out, on my own. And I would walk out the door and usually take somebody hostage with me, and I'd run for a while, and until things got tremendously worse and, more arrests or hurt my family more. And that's like one of the things I really didn't essentially think about that much, is like how much pain I was putting on others when I was going through this process, and until after the fact when I, end up in recovery. Through that kind of set of events, I ended up in New Haven the first time, and it was flat. I didn't have a car or a license, so I'd be doing a lot of walking. The food was great, best pizza in the world.
I get that.
Shout out New Haven Pizza. I'd be lying if I said there was a lot of pretty girls there because of the schools and stuff like that, So that was my main factors of like kind of going to New Haven the first time. And that's when I felt, for the first time, or second time actually, the loving hand of recovery reach out when I went to that Pacific Group meeting, and those guys are standing there. I wasn't ready at the time, and and I went for more years. I went back to Waterbury. I lived in Waterbury for a number of years, and things got progressively worse. And I was on probation for like 5 years at that time, and I had just had the homicide unit at my condo because my girlfriend's car had been rented out to somebody and they used it to commit, a really bad crime. And, but in my head, I'm like, oh, life's not that bad. Or like, this is just what life is, I had come to that realization, like, this is the best my life can ever be. And I settled for that. I'm living off of stolen food from Cumberland Farms or like the dollar menu. I don't even know if they still have the dollar menu. It's like a $2 menu now at
I
McDonald's.
think it's like 6.
But I get like a chicken sandwich a day. I'd steal some donuts from Cumberland Farms, and then I fed like a heroin habit, a crack cocaine habit, a dust habit, benzo habit, and alcohol, and I was a good middleman. I had a car always, and the dealers trusted me, so I would drive their kids around or drive them to make sales and stuff. So I always had a lot of stuff, or I knew people that wanted to buy stuff, and I got into bad things, prostituting women and using my house as a cook-up house, and just like all the horrible things that eventually kind of become your life.
The normal things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That never as a kid once did I ever think that this would be how it was, and I'd say December 2010 is when I missed an appointment with my probation officer. And because going back to like being able to live somewhat normally being a heroin addict, but when crack cocaine becomes like your number one, your primary focus, like all bets are off with that. I can't hold a job, can't make appointments, even with my probation officer who says I go to jail or not. So I missed an appointment, and the next time I come in, she drug tests me, and she hadn't been drug testing me. I was on a methadone program in New Haven for like 2 years at that point, and that was a joke. And, I never gave them a clean urine in 2.5 years. And, but so I went to see her, and when she gave me the test, it lit up like a Christmas tree. And she's like, what's going on here? And next couple times it's worse, everything you can imagine is on there. And she's like, that's it, Monday you're going to go to prison and finish your 2.5 years, or you can go to treatment. And where my thinking is at the time is very off and unrealistic. And in my head, I'm like, I'm a tough guy. I've been running the streets of Waterbury for a while, and, I can go to jail, prison, But then I kind of looped back around to like, well, it's going to be all guys there. That sucks. The food's going to be horrible. And I'm not going to be able to smoke cigarettes. I smoked Newports at the time. And, it's funny because God's got jokes, because I go to her and I say, okay, I'll go to treatment, And Monday she sends me to CVH, and it's an all-male program, state-run hospital, so you can't smoke cigarettes. And the food was not the greatest.
Oh, there was no smoke breaks or anything?
No. People had cigarettes in there, but she also said if I didn't do well there, I was going to go to prison, for 2+ years. So I didn't want to do that. So, I had one person in my life that was still willing to talk to me. Like, even all my addict friends I grew up with distanced themselves from me because it was that bad, I couldn't be trusted with anything. And this person said, I'll drive you on Monday. She told me on Saturday night. I remember standing in the bedroom I was staying in, and I had a bunch of crack laid out. I had some heroin, and I couldn't smoke crack anymore. Like, my body was just completely shut down. And she goes, I'll pick you up. I have a rental car. I have $700. I'll pick you up Monday, and we'll do whatever you want to do, and then I'll drop you off there. And when I'm in my active mindset, if you tell me you have 50 cents, which they might be a little bit more now, 50 cents for a Lucy that I can get at the bodega the next day, I'm going to call you repeatedly for that 50 cents, So I wake up at like 6 o'clock Sunday, beg my dad, who showed up at the apartment, for like $40 to get better. Gives it to me. I go use, I fall out in the car. I come back. I come home Monday morning. For some reason, that conversation with her was never in my mind, in my memory. And I begged my dad, who again told me, don't call me your father anymore, to drive me to Middletown. He does. I'm like 2 or 3 days in. I call this person because they're the only person in the world that'll talk to me, and they're like, "What happened to you? You know, you were supposed to call me. You know, I told you I had this rental car, all this money. We're gonna do whatever you want to do." And I was like, "What?" And then all of a sudden, the conversation, everything flowed back into me, and I could tell you to this day where I was standing when I had this conversation with her. You know, and I started looking at that, like what was that, you know? And what I came up with was something intervened, something major intervened outside of myself, outside of human power.
That was a defining moment.
Yeah, a big moment of clarity that I was able to realize that, you know? So what I came up with was, you know, maybe I would have died that day from using, maybe I would have hurt somebody, maybe we got arrested and I would have went to prison, and kind of coming back to that purpose, I wouldn't be able to live out what God's purpose is in my life, you know? So,
How old were you?
31, yeah. In which at that time, and if anyone's listening, you know, I thought my life was over at 31.
Yeah.
You know, now I look back, I'm like, oh my God, that's young. You know, I'm so glad, you know, I got a taste of this thing at 31, you know. But at that time, but you know, in my head, I'm like, all these people I knew in their 20s went to 4-year colleges, they had jobs, they're starting families, all this stuff, you know. Then now I see at 35 to 40 to 45 now, a lot of those things aren't working out that well for that population. That's a whole other story. But so I met this guy who you might know in treatment, Carl, Polish Carl. Remember Polish Carl?
Yeah.
Polish Carl saved my life more than anybody else. And
the painter.
Yes,
Well,
fisherman, painter,
yeah,
all
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
That Carl.
Yeah.
Carl was another client, and Carl was the first one that I've ever formed a real intimate friendship with in my entire life, and that was just based on him being honest and open with me when we were in treatment. And like I was saying, like, they would shut down CVH all the time because of the weather, and they're all state employees, and a lot of them wouldn't come in. So we just walked and talked for 45 days, you know? And he had mentioned to me that he had a year sober at one time, and he was living in New Haven, and like described that year. And I was like, oh my God, you had a year, you know, off drugs? I was like, how the hell does someone do that? I can't do it for one day. Never been able to do it for one day. From 12 to 31 years old, I always had something in my system at all times. And we, you know, I just built trust with him. So when he asked me what I was doing afterwards, I said, you know, I remember New Haven being kind of cool, you know, and the food and flat, and you know, I had a suspended license of like 2.5 years or something.
Yeah,
at that
because
time.
Waterbury's not flat.
No, I had to be as far away from Waterbury as possible.
Yeah.
I just knew that would be my demise. And I said, oh, I'll go back to New Haven, you know? And he's like, great, you know, I'm gonna give you a list of 9 guys. I'm gonna call them every single day for 2 weeks, and I'll show you a magic trick, is what he told me. And Carl would say something like that, you know? And of course, when I get it out, I don't do that. You know, I do what Allan's brain thinks he should do. I get a pair of Jordans, I go get a haircut, I sit in the back of a meeting, I don't raise my hand and say I'm new or I need help or talk to any of the guys. And a week goes by and he's at another program, and he calls me and he's like, so how's it going calling those people, you know? And honesty was a brand new thing of mine, but I was honest with them based on our true friendship that we built in those 45 days. And I said I didn't do it, and Carl smashed me on the phone, like just went in on me and called me a liar, and he said, you're going to do something, you didn't do it, and just hammered me and knew how to really get at me. And I was like, all right, dude, just shut the fuck up. And I pretty much just wanted him to shut up, but I said I would do it. And that day was like the turning point to my entire life. I called Benny first. He was on that list. Joe M was on that list. Scott was on that list. Dave P was on that list. Vin was on that list. And that first day, Benny picked me up, ended up being my sponsor for 5.5 years. Joe picked me up the second day. I was crying within 5 minutes of being in his car with him. Just has that effect on you. And these 5-6 guys really showed me how to live from that point on for a very long time, until I, built up my network, and I was living in this guy Rick's, Reverend Rick. I don't know if you know him, Redhead Rick. He had a sober house in Hamden, and I was living there. And they said you should go to this place in New Haven called the Harry House, and it's funny, back then I'm like, well, how do I like break up with this other sober house and like go to this other place? And like, well, first of all, call this guy John, and I remembered I was driving up to see Carl at Lebanon Pines with Vince, and I called John on the phone, and he was great, he was great, and he's like, yeah, you can move in, and I was struggling financially and stuff. My dad was helping me out a little bit, thankfully, but he's like, we'll figure it out, and that was John, with everybody. He'd give you work to do, or Barry's house, you do work, whatever, and it would pay for the rent, And I had that mindset, like, that's all I need to do anyways, is like, just make sure I can take care of my housing situation and food. I was on food stamps at the time and stuff like that, and
$118 a month.
something like that,
Yeah.
yeah. So I moved to the Harry House, and I immediately use and don't tell anybody, and except for it's funny because we can be doing all the right things. I was talking to the sponsor. I started reading the book. I was going to meetings. I might have had a commitment already. I was praying, all this stuff, and I get home from a meeting. I see something in my house that didn't look right, and immediately I go, I have $200 in my pocket. Let's go, and that's all. And then it was off, and. So I used that day and the next day, and then by a miracle, I have not ever used since, since March 1st, 2011 is my recovery date. And I jumped back in full force to like a recovery program and did everything they told me to do, but I wasn't being honest about that fact.
Where was your room? Where was your
Third floor,
apartment?
Third floor, all the way at the end on the right.
Dude, I was in the same part.
With Chris.
Same place.
With Chris Maltese.
Chris Maltese. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the same, and when you walked in, were you to the single room or were you in the double room?
I was first in the double on the right. The right was double, actually.
Yeah.
And then
the left was a single.
And then eventually, when Chris moved across,
dude, we were in the same exact room.
And I love that place for many different reasons, but one, like, I never paid a bill in my life. I've never had anything that was my own. And like, you had this little apartment that had a kitchenette and a table and your own bathroom and stuff, and I felt like I had something. I really, for the first time in my life, felt like I had something. And we had a great house. So many awesome guys. Some of them still to this day sober. But it was also the alumni of there, and we had
Gone to the Dogs on Wednesday night.
Yeah, so like a lot of guys come over, read with guys before, then we would have that meeting, and that in my mind was the best meeting in New Haven for years, and we'd have like 80 guys or something. I don't even know, 50 to 80 guys in that room on a Wednesday night, and so I start doing all the work, but I'm not being honest about that thing, and eventually, after going to the Dogs meeting, I remember finally having enough faith, I guess you would say, and walk up to Joe and Ben after the meeting, and I say, I gotta tell you something, because my supposed year was coming up, and I said, listen, I gotta tell you something. When I first moved here, I used, and both of them look at me and they go, yeah, we know. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, we've known this whole time. And I was like, I realized, I don't know if it was at that moment, but shortly after, like what they did for me by not telling me that they knew, because that helped me find my relationship with a higher power and rely on that higher power versus them giving me the out there, So I had to find some sort of stronger faith to say, I can trust these guys, and also it doesn't matter what they think, but I need to be honest about this if I'm going to save my ass, And that day I felt like this big block between me and whatever my higher power is was removed, and there was a direct channel there. And I went back through the work and did it honestly and thoroughly, and thankfully, I've been still sober to this day. 13 and a half years later. A lot of miraculous things happened. At 31, I was working at Starbucks, making $9 an hour. Like, what the hell am I gonna do with my life? And I was on High Street in New Haven, which is like the busiest Starbucks in the freaking state.
Get well job.
Yeah, and I worked with like Vince and Kelly and
Vince.
Yeah. Vince is the best.
Vince still there?
I don't know. I haven't talked to Vince in years. I miss him. He's
Vince
the best.
was there at the Harry Rosen house when I was there.
Yeah. Vince is great. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but Kelly was there, and a lot of us that were in recovery, and we could have those conversations about work and have fun and stuff like that. So it was great.
When were you at the Harry Rosen?
2011. All of 2011, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You remember Big Mike?
Nah, my cousin Brian, I think, was there around the same time you were, Bink. Yeah.
I was there 2008 to 2009.
Yeah,
I was there 18 months.
I'd say he was around there 2007. He was there twice. He was there once with Josh and.
Yeah, Josh and Tommy. And
Yeah. He knows all those guys.
Yeah. Scott Murray.
Yeah. So Scott was on that list too, and shout out to Scott, and I'll tell him this in front of people all the time. Scott gave me my first work ever. He's like, "Can you hold a paintbrush?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'll give you $15 an hour and I'll buy you pizza at the end of the day." And he took me on a job to like Stanford or something, right?
Yeah.
And that was just like holy shit, Like I felt love from that,
Yeah.
And Scott was, another one of those people that was real pivotal in the beginning there, and I love that guy.
He still is, man. He hires a lot of our guys.
Yeah.
A few of my guys still work for him. And
He's
then
the best.
Troy too, man. Troy was one of those guys that like wasn't scared, because I was big, angry, and fucking like this. I stayed the fuck away from me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want anybody coming near me.
Yeah.
And he was one of those guys. Hey, how you doing? What's up, man? Blah 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 blah. And,
super friendly.
Yeah.
Super friendly.
Yeah.
Troy's one of the, like I was saying, like when him and Chaz were at that meeting, and that stuck out real big to me. Years later when I was ready to come back. I love all those guys in a very special way. So many of them have had an impact in my life in many ways, and who I try to be as a man these days and whatnot,
Yeah, man.
So it's wild, but, so I lived at the Harry House for like a year.
Yeah.
Actually got kicked out because I started dating someone during that time, and we were up in my apartment wrapping Christmas presents. Not doing no shenanigans ever, but John got wind of it, and you weren't allowed to have females upstairs, and I accepted that. Like I was like, okay, I fucked up. You're right. And there was no ill will towards him at all. I broke a rule, and for the first time in my life, I was like, okay, I accept that these are the consequences. And me and John always had a really good relationship. So I ended up moving in with that girl, and into an apartment in 2012, right at the end of Dixwell, like right downtown. It was a great spot, and that was like first time ever like living as an adult, paying bills and going to work and stuff like that. At that time I started working in the recovery space and got my first job as like a tech over at Turning Point, and doing that, but I also was bouncing at clubs and bars, because again I was starting at 31, so like I was trying to play catch up, and hustle and stuff, and for the first 5 years I did both jobs. I would work in treatment during the day, and then I would work in nightclubs at night, and I still can't tell you which atmosphere was crazier, but I don't suggest that to anybody in early recovery to go work as a bouncer or a doorman, because there's just so much that goes with that, that doesn't mix well with recovery, but that girl and I got together, and the funny story about that is, it's a whole God thing too. Is I got introduced to her through Benny. There was a spring conference in New Haven at that time, and she was speaking. So he just introduced me. He said, "This is my friend, Jill," and she was speaking, and so I associated friendship there. And I went to a meeting one night, and standing room only, the Alcoholics in Action meeting on Sundays, and I see her, and she's like falling asleep in the meeting. I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So after the meeting, I go up to her, and I lay eyes on her, and I wanted to check on her. I knew that she was friends with Ben, and it turns out she had, she was wearing scrubs. She had worked third shift and then worked first shift, went to school, and then showed up at the meeting. So she was shot, and that night she Facebook messages me, and we start talking, and then shortly after we go on a date, and we go to the beach in West Haven, and almost 14 years later, I haven't been able to shake her, but so we end up moving in, and
That's the girl you were wrapping presents with?
Yeah, now she's been my wife for over 10 years, so
Is she in recovery too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to be careful what I say,
Yeah, no.
putting other people's business
Yeah.
out there, but in a public format. But the last 13 years, I started working in the field and held some direct care positions. We got together, we got married in 2014, and that was something I never ever imagined, was having a family or getting married or owning a home. Any of that stuff I never thought was in the cards for me. Like that wasn't any real dreams of mine either, because I just didn't dream that big. And we built a beautiful life together. In 2015, when we were about to welcome our first child, I had 2 heart attacks and massive cardiac arrest, and I had my daughter, who was inside my wife at the time, was kicking her at like 4 a.m. She woke up to use the bathroom and heard me making some weird noises and turned on the lights, and I was blue and my eyes were in the back of my head, and we were living at her parents' house at the time, and her brother was there too, and they pulled me out of bed and did CPR until we live up in Durham, and there's a volunteer services there, so they took a little bit to get there, and then they shocked me 5 times, which, talking to EMTs afterwards and paramedics, they usually don't shock you more than 3 times. They got my heart going on the 5th one, and I was out for about 40 minutes, and ended up in Yale. I was there for 5 days, but what's so beautiful about being connected, not just through work, but the recovery community, is like Yale waiting room was full of people I knew from the recovery community, from both my jobs, and all out of love. I didn't have that before. I didn't have any solid relationships or anything, in my life, and like all these people showed up, constantly, every day, bringing my wife stuff. There was tons of prayer groups and stuff like that, and thankfully I recovered, and I got to see my first child be born in June of 2015, my daughter, and she saved my life. I like to remind myself of that when she makes me angry, and I'm like, listen, she saved your life. Dude, chill out,
Yeah.
And then 2018 we welcomed my son Beckett, and he's like a spitting image of me, but without the trauma. That's how I kind of describe my son. He's me, but without the trauma as a kid, and I show up on a daily basis, and I do all this stuff that I do for myself, not just for me anymore, but to be the most present parent, to be the most present husband, to be a present employee or whatnot, and just to show up the best I can, and give myself and them the best life that I possibly can. But so many amazing things have happened. In terms of like purpose with a profession. when I was working at Starbucks at 31, like not knowing what I was going to do. I was going to become an electrician. They wouldn't take me into the union. And then these two guys I knew from recovery that worked at Turning Point came in one day and they're like, you know, do you have a year sober? And I was like, no, not yet. March I will. And they're like, well, would you ever think about working in the treatment space, you know? I was like, what? Like, what? That, like, how I'm going to be on the other side of the fence, you know, and be able to maybe help some people and stuff. I'm like, this blew my mind. So I took advantage of that, you know, and I started working in the field in May of 2012 and slowly built up to like, you know, work at some wonderful places, work with thousands and thousands of people over the years, you know, their families too. I really love that work and to a place where, you know, now I have an amazing job where, you know, I manage folks too that help people on a daily basis. I have my hands very deep into one of our specific facilities at Banyan up in Massachusetts called Clearbrook and work really closely with the leadership there to make that program like the best program we possibly can, you know. Anything I'm going to associate my name with is I'm going to do everything in my power to make that A+, you know. A place where I would send family and friends, in which I've sent multiple family members and multiple friends there, you know. It's something I'm really proud of, you know. On top of that, you know, my wife and I separately do a lot of stuff with mental health and substance, you know, and you know, she's owners of 3 different mental health or outpatient services in Connecticut, and you know, we have a intervention and case management, recovery coaching, consulting business too, and our lives are full, you know. They're full. You know, my job is not my life. I've learned that the hard way over the years. Recovery has to be at the forefront of everything, you know, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't lose sight of that at times. You know, I went through a really tough time about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, you know, where I was walking through an airport and I had a breakdown, you know, and I didn't know what was going on, but it had to do with some trauma stuff and, you know, the loss of something that was special to me at the time, and from there I had a decision, you know. The first decision was, do I drink over it or do something about it, you know. So I jumped back in, you know. Meditation was never one of those things that I did on a daily basis or multiple times through the week, and that's something that's been a real strong point in my recovery for the last 2+ years. Journaling, you know, outside help with a therapist, you know. I have a ton of trauma from my childhood and then from the streets, you know, being kidnapped twice and stuck up with guns and stabbed and doing really offensive, bad things to other people, and then through recovery, I mean, I've known 100 to 120 people that are dead, you know, just in the last 13 and a half years. So, and then I deal in crisis all day. Like, that's when my phone rings, it's someone's worst day of their life, typically. So I deal in that nonstop. So it's important to have a really solid wellness plan, you know. And
for yourself.
Yeah. Or I'm not going to be able to be dad. I'm not going to be able to be the worker. I'm not going to be able to show up here. I'm not going to be able to be a friend, you know. So it's like, for me, it's like meditation, it's journaling, it's prayer, it's recovery meetings, it's the gym, it's therapy, it's, you know, a ton of time with friends, time with my family, you know.
I call those non-negotiables.
Yeah.
You know, because I know for myself, because I'm in the field, we've been doing this for 10 years now. And previous relapse, I had 7.5 years relapse. And then, you know, now I've been back this time. And, you know, working in this field, you see so many people get in the field and their recovery stops.
Yeah.
And then they're taking care of everybody else, they get burnt out and end up using again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
I've seen two people off the top of my head that are dead as a result of it. You know, they make either the treatment, the recovery, or they start chasing money, you know. And all the other things that kind of come along with that and push God out, you know, and you know, I've fallen into some of the same stuff over the time, you know. You know, where, you know, the ego boosters become important and stuff, and I lost sight of like how important it is to just be another bozo on the bus and just show up and suit up and be of service.
Yeah.
be a good dad and stuff like that, you know. And that's fear, you know, that's always fear. That's overcoming faith when you're doing all that stuff, you know, for me. So, you know, for today, you know, I got up this morning, I prayed, I did my readings. I did not meditate or journal, but, you know, I put myself in a space that recovery was number one today, you know. I went to the gym the last 2 days, so I took today off. But I was there at home, make lunch for my kids, make sure that they were up, put both of them on the bus, you know, and
How old are the kids?
9 and 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Boy and girl,
Yeah,
boy?
yeah, my oldest is a girl, yeah, Audrey.
Okay.
Yeah, she's amazing. And then my son, you know, they're both, thank God, they're healthy, they're beautiful, they're kind, you know, they're sociable. There's a lot of weird kids out there nowadays, but they're sociable, you know, and you know, it's just like, what a gift.
People that are in recovery, that do recovery, like those non-negotiable things every day, take really good care of themselves. We make great parents.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we get to really experience, you know, being in their lives and helping them to grow up, you know, to become good human beings.
Yeah.
You know, but I like what you said when you said, you know, your kid is he gets a lot of nurture. He doesn't get all that trauma.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I found out my ex-wife was pregnant, I was like, wow, I'm gonna be a dad. I've been alone for 50 years, and now I'm gonna be married and I'm gonna be a dad.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't know how to be a father. And I told my best man, and he said to me, he goes, yeah, you do. Your father taught you everything not to do. And I remember that, man. It was one of those moments.
Yeah.
And I you know, that's what I always go back to when I start to doubt myself. Like, fuck, you know, I fucked up. Like, cause we fuck up. You fuck up as parents.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? They say the wrong thing, or you know, I've never hit my kids, but there's been a couple times where I'm like, I want to just strangle them.
Yeah.
You know, because you're not listening. You're doing that dumb shit I did when I was little.
Yeah. Well, also too, like if I'm overstimulated or if I'm not taking care of myself, I show up as another person than if I am doing that stuff, you know. But you mentioned something I get to. You know, there's a lot of things I get to do.
Yeah.
Again, if I have the mindset and the perspective of gratitude.
Well, that's a gratitude perception.
Right.
Of things.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, fuck, I don't want to drive to Feral Treatment Center. I used to do a commitment at Feral Treatment Center. Tuesday nights, I'd had to be there for 8 o'clock. I didn't want to drive there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I would always go back to that. You know what I get to do? This like Feral Treatment Center saved my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I get to go there and, you know, be part of a meeting. And, you know, when I left there, I just felt amazing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the cold plunge. You ever do the cold plunge?
I love the cold plunge.
Dude, the cold plunge sucks going in.
Yeah.
But when you're in it, you start to, like, okay, I got this. And then you get out I get out 3 minutes later. And I'm like, fuck, I feel great.
What's your temperature? What's your
55.
55.
Yeah. What about you?
I've gone as low as like 40, 42 or something. The last one I did actually was in a river in Tennessee in April.
Yeah.
And we ended up staying in there for like 5 to 6 because we were
Yeah,
talking.
once you get through the first minute, then, you know.
You typically don't want to do more than like 3 to 5 minutes, I think, right? But I love it. Well, it kind of like I'm like one
Do you
of
know
those
what the
sickos.
temperature was in Tennessee?
I would say it was in the 40s.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm one of those sick people that likes pain too. You know, like I got a lot of tattoos, and you know, sometimes you know you know the pain is reminds me that I can feel. You know, and but I love the cold plunge. I see the value of it tremendously. You know, I've done it multiple times.
Sucks going in, but you feel like $1 million coming out.
Yeah, I hear you got one at the mansion.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
I do.
awesome.
Like anytime I'm gonna go do something, I'll jump in the cold plunge.
Yeah.
Like if it's 2 o'clock and I'm tired, I'll go jump in the cold plunge and then go work out.
That'll wake you up.
That'll wake you up?
Oh yeah.
You feel alive, man. It feels like every cell in your body feels alive out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So it's great.
Man. So tell me the biggest greatest thing that's happened to you that you didn't expect was going to happen in recovery?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I can go
Too many.
Yeah, there's so
Too
many.
many.
Because immediately I want to say like
Kids.
my family, you know. But I kind of go back to like being a trusted person. You know? Like if I wasn't a trusted person, or if I wasn't someone that showed up and did this stuff, like I would have never attracted any of that. I wouldn't attract my wife. I wouldn't have had the family. But it's given me everything. But honestly, like if I didn't do the work though, right? Like there's work you have to do, in recovery. It's not just showing up, but there's work. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had a personality change that brought me to be a trusted individual from friends and family and stuff like that. So I'd say, because I was not a trusted individual in the past, So I'd probably say, that, to people trust me now.
Yeah.
They count on me.
That's important to you.
Yeah. Very. I take that very seriously.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. How about you?
I love being a dad. I'm blown away that God trusts me to be a dad. I think me being able to love people and people loving me, and then most importantly, me loving myself, like the love I have for myself today. Because if I don't have that love for myself, I'm selling the world short.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
that takes for me, it took a long time.
It does
to like myself.
It does. Yeah.
If I'm being 100% honest, like I think I'm just starting to love myself.
Okay.
But I really like who I've become.
Well, let me ask you this: if you had an outer body experience, and you were able to look at your life today and where you came from, because redemption stories, I love them. I love to see redemption stories. That's why I love the Redemption House, because we take guys that have nothing, and there's so many of them, and now 3, 4, 5 years later, they have these fucking incredible lives.
Right.
And it's like someone gave them a chance and shut that fucking door in their face, and now they're here. So, I'm having a Joe Biden moment. I lost my train of thought. But, what would you say about this guy, Allan Griffith?
We've got through a lot,
Yeah.
And you've trusted the process, You've
What kind of man is he?
You've counted the miracles, that have happened. Oh, he's a stand-up guy. He's a guy that shows up for himself, for his friends, for his family. Do anything for you. Be a good ear for you. He's trustworthy.
What's he do for himself?
Well, he puts himself first. Actually, he actually puts himself first these days. And a lot of, because I didn't learn about trauma until I was like 9, 10 years sober, and then I got certified as a trauma professional. I've done a ton of work around that, and where some of that lies is like codependency due to trauma and stuff like that, and that's why I would put other people's needs and wants first before mine and stuff like that. So I've done a lot of work around that in the last 3, 4 years. Because they go hand in hand, I mean, one of the stats is like over 90% of people that have substance use disorder have trauma in their background. That's wild,
I think it's even higher than that.
It might. This is like a stat I heard out of like one of the leading trauma therapists in the country 4 years ago. Was over 90%.
Yeah.
But if anyone comes from like a dysfunctional background, family life, or they're an adult child of, say, someone with substance use, I highly recommend the Big Red Book in ACA, which talks about adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. That literature blew my freaking mind, you know.
Okay. You went through it?
I'm going through it. I attend those types of recovery meetings as well, and that's more about like inner child and trauma and family of origin stuff, and it's another part of my wellness plan. You know, just trying to kind of figure me out so that I can best show up. You know, for myself.
You gotta get uncomfortable to get comfortable.
Big time.
You know what I mean? So we got to do that. We got to do the hard work. But listen, we're out of time.
Yeah.
This episode has gone over.
Sorry.
It's been great, man. It's been great. I love hearing your story, man.
Thanks.
I didn't know it was that in depth. I didn't know, those things that you went through, and I always love to hear guys when they have that defining moment, like something that turns it around. But let me ask you, and I always ask this question last. What would you tell somebody that's ready to give up? Like, fuck this, I'm 35 days clean, nothing's getting better. I don't have the job, I don't have the woman, I don't have the career, I don't have anything. What would you say to them?
The only thing I've had to do for myself, and I see it work really well for others, is surrender. You know, that's it.
Trust the
Surrender to
process.
love, trust the process.
Yeah.
Surrender. Give up that control you think you have.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't. You know, and love the pain.
Love the pain. Yes, because the pain becomes a power.
Yeah.
That we use to help others. Like,
100%.
because how many times have you been in a meeting and somebody will share something like, "Come here, yeah, dude, I got diddled too when I was a kid," and then you'll laugh about it.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Great way to start my day.
Yeah, dude, and you kicked off season 3.
Woo!
And man, remember this podcast is for Redemption House. It's a place for people to go when they got nowhere to go. And if you need help, reach out. And Shing Shing, thank you for producing our first episode of season 3. And make sure you share the show.
Super. Yay.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Perfect.
Listen to the song, man.
That's beautiful.
I'll send it to you.
Please. Yeah, I like it.
What do you think? Did I do good with the season 3 song?
The guest says loves it, so how could it be
Yeah,
wrong?
it's wonderful.
Yeah, man.
I've been listening to a lot of the like country Americana stuff too.
Yeah.
That's great. It just fills me up, you know?
Share the show.
Yep. Awesome.
That's it, man.
All right.
That's so deep.
Oh,
I mean, I feel like you could go another episode just keep
Oh,
on.
yeah, we
there's a
we
lot
gotta-
of stuff there that I didn't talk
Yeah.
about, yeah.
Yeah, man.
When you
Let's
have
we'll
gone
do it
through
again.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Definitely do it
When
again.
you have gone through when you're a child,
Yeah.
and oh my god,
There's details. Yeah.
oh boy.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I feel like it sometimes can come back to haunt you.
Oh, tremendous. Yeah, it affects me in how I respond, how I show up, how I
Yeah.
shut down, like all my trauma does, yeah. So I see EMDR therapists every week, and I went and did a very intensive trauma program back in April in Tennessee. That's why I was in the river. And that
was part of the program?
That's the greatest place you'll ever go in
Did
your
it
life.
help?
Yeah, it's called Onsite. They've been around since 1977. They work with a lot of like professionals too, and you can get a professional's discount. And it's 7 days of intensive trauma work.
What's the cost on that?
It's about 5.
Oh,
around
ain't
5.
fucking bad. They feed you and everything?
Place is beautiful. Place is beautiful.
Shit.
Movie stars go there.
Yeah.
But you want to hear the coolest thing about there is, first of all, you have to give over all your electronics. So I haven't been away from
Fuck,
like
I
my
do
phone
that
has
in
been
a
going
fucking minute, dude.
like my phone has been going nuts since I sat down. I gave away all that stuff. Hadn't been away from my phone. The second part, especially being helpers, let's say, you can't say what you do for work when you go there. So you take that hat off, and I'm just Allan, you're just Rick.
Wow.
And you don't know what anyone else does, so it takes away any prejudgment, because, you there's some pretty wealthy people that go there, right?